Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praises are Allah's, Lord of the worlds. And may His peace and blessings be upon our Master, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and His pure Immaculate Ahlul Bayt. Okay, so apparently there are different tastes amongst the community here, and first they told me to change the content of the first few lectures, and then I changed. Now they want me to go back, but with your permission, the next 1 or 2 days I'll still continue on the theme of the aspects of different family members and how they have to relate with one another. And then, inshallah, from the 15th or 16th day, inshallah, we'll change and go back to the previous content, inshallah. We were speaking about the woman and her status in Islam, and then we spoke about the fact that women are nurturers, and in many rulings and in Islam, this nurturing capacity is reflected. And we said men are providers, essentially. I don't want to really continue too much on this point. Just 1 or 2 dilemmas that sometimes arise, especially in the West. One is the concept of hitting women. And what is all this about? And there's a verse in the Quran where وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ, those women whom you fear their disobedience. We said women only have 2 forms of wajib duties. Those 2 wajib duties are 2 forms of obediences. One was that of sexual gratification, and we spoke about that, what it meant. Then in the verse, it says here, when men fear that women are refraining from this dimension, and without any excuse, and they're refraining. The Quran then gives a step-by-step protocol of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy as Munkar that the man should exercise before the woman. It first says, فَإِذُوهُنَّ, if they disobey you in this field, you counsel them, advise them, speak with them, see what the problem is. Maybe you're the problem. To see exactly what the reasons are. And if it's solved, so be it. If it's not solved, the next step of Amr bil Ma'ruf is وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. You turn away from them in bed. Now in Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy as Munkar, one of the prerequisites is that you only do it if you deem it probable that it will have an effect. If you don't deem it probable, then it becomes aborted. Here the next step is that you turn away from them in bed. It may have an effect upon them. They may return in their ways. And so far there's nothing problematic with these 2 steps, but there's nothing problematic at all. But some problems arise in our understanding in relation to the 3rd step. And that's وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ, then hit them. That's the 3rd step. Now what does this hitting mean? There are 4 different positions that I've come across. And naturally I have a favorite one, and I'll tell you which one that is, but there are 4 different positions. We'll just go through them one by one. First of all, if you believe it's a physical beating, and I've seen the translation of beating in some translations of the Quran, when daraba has a number of meanings. One is hitting, one is placing, one is tapping. It has different meanings. One is traveling. I'll come to that in a minute. if you're of the opinion that it's actually physically beating them, that can't be acceptable, because that goes against the logic of the verses of the Quran and the logic of the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. In our Sharia, if you even hit them to a very slight degree that a redness is caused in their skin, there's blood money assigned for that. You have to pay them. If it's a bruise, you have to pay more, depending on the colour of the bruise, and so on and so forth. These are difficult payments. These are sins. That's why the blood money is assigned, because you've sinned by hitting them. So that won't be an acceptable interpretation of this verse. But that's the one we all encounter in the media. Now, we have to see what this hitting is. First of all, this hitting is only in relation to that disobedience in the sexual realm. Nothing else that the woman does deserves any hitting. But now, only in this realm, what this hitting actually entails, we have to see. It's not a physical beating, though. It can't be. It goes against the logic of our traditions. The next position, respectable scholars have said this next position, and since they're respectable, it's okay, I want to mention it. But it seems as if they want to just escape from it. You see, I said yesterday, we shouldn't be embarrassed about the Quran. This is God's word. There's no need to, kind of escape the issue academically sometimes. Here what they've done is, the verse in the Quran says, وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ, hit them, as the third step in Amr Ma'ruf, if they disobey. Only that action, nothing else. They say, look, this zaraba has many meanings. One of them is traveling. In the Quran, chapter 356, إِذَا ضَرَبُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, when they travel the land. So they say, since daraba also means traveling, وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ means the man to travel away, to go, to distance themselves from a woman for a few days or something like that. It's very unlikely for that to be the case. And at the end it will become evident why. But the thing is, it's saying hit them. The hunna, that female pronoun, plural pronoun for females, saying hit them, the women. It doesn't make sense to say travel them. You have to, the subject and object has to be, observed in Arabic grammar. Not travel them. You have hit them. And then nowhere in the Quran or in the traditions, in relation to this, idribuhunna, hit them, does it speak of traveling, but it does speak of hitting. So that may be more pleasing for the West for you to mention. And it may be true, but it has no Quranic support. It has no support from the traditions either. But it may be one variation, and some scholars have said that. Then we come to the third and fourth. These two are both acceptable. And they're acceptable because they're on a par with the traditions, they're on a par with rationality, and one of them actually is a very delicate irfani angle that it portrays. But that which is most likely to be the most accurate, maybe, and scholars have mentioned this, especially one in Mashhad, who has given this position, he uses the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt to support the fact that it is hitting, but this hitting has been defined in the traditions. Now, let's first go through, they're both prophetic traditions actually. In the first tradition, the Holy Messenger says, أَيَضْرِبُ أَحَدُكُمْ الْمَرْأَةَ ثُمَّ يَذِلُّ مَعَانِقَهَا. Does any one of you, hit the woman and then you embrace them in your arms, saying that this is a contradiction in terms? You should never hit women. It doesn't make sense to hit them the next moment you're in their arms. It's a rhetorical question. But this important tradition, this one is important. It defines idribuhunna. That idribuhunna, which the exact phrase comes in the Quran, here the Holy Messenger defines it. Inni, the Holy Prophet is saying this, verily I, ata'ajjabu mimma yadrib imra'atahu wa huwa bidar awla minha. The Prophet is saying, I'm surprised at the man who hits his wife when he is more deserving to be hit. The man is more deserving to be hit. La tadribu nisa'akum bil khashab. Don't hit your women with wood. Now, I'll explain why the wood has been brought into the equation. Don't hit them with wood. فَإِنَّ فِيهِ الْقِصَاص, because there's going to be blood money involved if you hit them with wood. وَلَكِنْ إِضْرِبُوهُنَّ, rather hit them, how? بِالْجُوءِ وَالْأُرَى, by hunger and not clothing them. حَتَّى تُرِيهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ, so that you may acquire peace in the world and the hereafter. Now those who were here in the previous sessions, we said that the woman has two wajib duties. One of them was in the sexual realm. The man has 101 wajib duties under the umbrella of the nafaqah. If you recall, we said that if the man compromises with the nafaqah, the woman cannot execute and decide not to execute either of those duties in proportion to how much the man refrained from paying the nafaqah. This hitting the woman is the other side now. That if the woman decides not to execute her duties, the man can compromise in giving the nafaqah. Idribuhunna, hit them, bilju, with hunger, wal-ura, and by not clothing them, because it's the man's responsibility. The man has to pay the nafaqah in food, in clothing, and so on and so forth. If the woman doesn't execute her wajib duty, the man can refrain from the nafaqah. That is hitting, explicitly mentioned in the traditions of Ahlul Bayt. So that's a good position to hold by. It's very safe, and it has to be explained. Now, in relation to the last position, and this is also supported by some traditions, it is hitting. But it's hitting with a toothbrush, a wooden toothbrush from a certain tree which is very soft. Now if you just imagine a toothbrush, a thin, like a pencil, something like that, it doesn't say it'anu hunna. It doesn't say, stab them or poke them. No. It says hit them. When it says hit them, you imagine something like a pencil. It's like hitting them like that. Now, we know from traditions that it shouldn't cause any redness, it shouldn't hurt them, bruise them, and so on and so forth, because that's a sin. It has blood money. So what on earth is this hitting about then? How would hitting with a toothbrush in a way that doesn't cause any redness, no bruising, and it can't even do it? Once I was just experimenting with myself, and even when you tap very hard, it doesn't even hurt. So what is this hitting all about? Why should they be hit with a toothbrush in relation to this specific action when it causes no pain? Oh, this is an important bit here now. On a par with the understanding of this fourth position, we said in Amr bil Ma'ruf, you only do it if you deem it probable that the other side will take note, they'll listen, they'll change their ways. So the question now is, the man and woman, their relationship with one another, would hitting with a toothbrush really change the woman's ways when the man does that? Because if there's swearing going on every day, when they disrespect one another every day, or do other things, when the veils of chastity are broken, what will just tapping with a toothbrush do? A wooden toothbrush. See, this one has to understand why has the Quran brought this like this? And then we come to this conclusion, that this verse, which is used in the media in the West, to be used as the most anti-woman verse that there exists, and it shows the Quran's anti-woman perspective, according to them, actually is the most woman-friendly of verses, most marital-friendly of verses. Why? Because in this verse, with that 3-step protocol, it's telling the man and woman before marriage that you have to behave with one another. That if Allah forbid, once one of you, for example the woman, disobeys the man, even if the man were to tap them with that toothbrush, it will have a psychological effect on the woman. That's how you have to preserve a marriage. But if marriage is involved in 101 worse things than hitting, and then someone comes, that's going to be a joke. It's not even going to be effective, according to his 4th position. So these are just some different perspectives to take note of when you come to this particular dilemma. Okay. So let's not go too much now into the woman. We'll just end with this statement from Imam Khomeini, who said, the value of a single night of the mother with the child surpasses years of the responsible father's efforts. This is someone who's carefully analysed the traditions from the Ahlul Bayt, and he sees this, definitively. One night that the mother spends with the child, even if she's not a believing mother, even if she is a vicious mother, but one night of that mother with the child is more precious, is more valuable than many years of the responsible father's efforts. See, now you should understand why he's saying this. That nurturing capacity you can't compare. Nurturing is different than just providing. The embodiment of affection and mercy in the mother's luminous outlook is the manifestation of the mercy and affection of the Lord of all worlds. The Almighty Allah has blended the mother's heart and soul with the light of mercy of His Lordship. The manifestations of Allah's rububiyyah. Women are manifestations of Allah's being Arhamur Rahimeen. They have that. The Almighty Allah has blended the mother's heart and soul with the light of mercy of His Lordship to the extent that it can't be identified anywhere save within the mother, and He, Allah, has granted this eternal mercy to them for their heaven-breaking burdens from the time of conception, during gestation, during labor, during birth, and so on. The noble tradition that reads, "Heaven lies under the mother's feet," is referring to a reality. Such delicate wording is emphasizing the mightiness of the matter, as well as warning children of the fact that they should seek prosperity and heaven from beneath the mother's feet. What does that mean? And that they should observe their sanctity, the mother's sanctity, as they observe Allah's sanctity. And they should seek their immaculate Lord's satisfaction through the satisfaction of their mothers. This is spiritual wayfaring. You abide by this, you will progress spiritually much more than even Salatul Layl. This is where Islam shows itself. Even if the mother isn't a practicing woman, even if she's even vicious in some aspects, doesn't matter. This is your salvation, lies here. Now, the Sharia has a certain criterion on how to treat parents. The Tariqah has a more deeper criterion in how to treat parents. In relation to the Sharia, children, they shouldn't harm or anger or disappoint their parents by doing an action that their society does expect anger or harm or disappointment in parents were the children to do it. So, for example, if a child was to shout loud to one's father or swear at them or do these things, or even shout at them. Here, even in America, this is your urf. You have to manage this criterion through this country. Here, yes, the common lay American would deem this as naturally and ordinarily causing disappointment and anger to one's parents, and therefore the Sharia says such actions are haram. But let's say if someone here in America wants to study, for example, biology, but their parents want them to study engineering. But since the child wants to do biology, this is disappointing the parents. This kind of disappointment won't be haram according to the Sharia, because according to the common lay American, this isn't something which should ordinarily cause disappointment or anger to one's parents. Now, in some cultures it may, back home, wherever it is. Every culture to its own. But here in America it's different. That child is now living here. His criteria is the common lay American. So, for example, one's legs being open in front of one's parents, in some cultures may be very rude. It may be haram there. Here it may not be, depending on culture to culture. I don't want to get to that. That's the Sharia. But the Tariqah is what Imam wrote. Imam being a Sufi. This is the path. The Tariqah, you listen whatever they say. Whatever they say to you. Unless it's a sin. But even there, you respect them. You be patient with them. You don't say, oh, this is a sin, that's haram. No. You do it in the best possible way. If you want to progress on the Tariqah, after mastering the Sharia, but you want to now go into more deep, to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you do whatever they say. Now, no one can do that. Everyone has a limit. You have a limit, I have a limit. We have to see now, where can we go? How far can we go with this? Just listen to what they say, your parents. Come and live with me, you go. Do this subject at school, you do it. I need you here for a week, you go. These things are important, spirituality-wise. The keys lie in these kind of things in Islam. And parents will mean both mother and father, but especially the mother. There is an emphasis on the mother in the traditions. I'll come to that in a minute. And this helps you to eliminate your ego, whatever your mother says. With those who are married, it becomes a bit more difficult now, because now you have a wife, for example. Now her interests have to be observed too. You can't oppress her rights in any way. You have to respect your mother maximally, but it can't be to the detriment of your wife's rights. And even with women, they have to respect their parents, but it can't be to the detriment of their husband's rights. They can't go against those rights. And it becomes quite tricky. Each case has its own solution. There's no general formula there. Now, I want to just go through two traditions in relation to the importance of parents. In one tradition, in the first tradition, I haven't written from which Imam it's from. Yes, but it reads, بِرُّ الْوَالِدَيْنِ مِنْ حُسْنِ مَعْرِفَةِ الْعَبْدِ بِاللَّهِ. Benevolence to parents is a good way for the servant to know oneself. You can evaluate yourself. Now this doesn't matter how old you are. If you have parents, you can evaluate yourself. Even if they've passed away, Sometimes you may be disowned by your parents, عُقُّ الْوَالِدَيْن, in this world, but when they've passed away, you do so much istighfar and give so much charity for them, you can compensate. It doesn't mean now they've passed away, there's no way of compensating. Sometimes you were very good with them in this world. When they passed away, you completely forgot them. You become disowned. Though they're dead. But you become disowned because you never did istighfar, you never recalled them, you never read the Quran for them, you never had a majlis for them. In some cultures, having majlis for one's deceased parents is very strong. That's a good attribute. In some cultures, it's weaker. But you can know yourself, evaluate yourself. How are you treating your parents? Because la ibadata. Look at this code, another code. This is what spirituality is all about. Because la ibadata asra'u bulughan li sahibiha ila rida Allah ta'ala min khidmatil walidain. Because there's no action of worship which is more speedier in acquiring Allah's satisfaction for people than serving one's parents. That's the most speediest act of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, serving them. The Sharia doesn't demand that, but the Tariqah does. The Sharia does to a certain limit. For example, if your parents, they're living, even if they're living in a house which is below their urfi socio-economic status, it becomes wajib. The children have to provide. So if the parents live on a par with their urf, with their socio-economic status, you should never allow your parents to live in accommodation which is below their status. We have that in the Sharia. The point is that the Sharia, though, it has a limit, though, at the end. It has definitions and boundaries. The Tariqah doesn't. Then the Tariqah speaks of it being the most speediest way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are important. Look at when people convert to Islam, the traditions in Islam always tell the newly converted, no matter who your parents are, whether they're believers, Christians and Jews, or even if they're atheists, the respect still has to be there. You still have to respect them. Not many religions have that. There's the man-made religion, which they call the Baha'i faith. Look at people who convert to this man-made religion. Look at them. See how they are told to treat their parents. They do everything so they get isolated from their parents. We don't have that. These are important issues. Islam never compromises with the parents, never compromises with the status of the mother, no matter who they are. It's a mother. It has a womb. She's a nurturer. It doesn't matter what she believes in. In this next tradition, someone asked the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that what is the father's right? What's the father's right? And the Holy Prophet said that you have to provide him with that which he needs. That which is on a par with his status, you provide him. And you have to always provide to your parents before they ask you. If I knew these traditions when I was in England, before I went to Rome, I wouldn't have gone to Rome. These are wisdoms. I don't know what the wisdom of going to Rome was, but it was impossible for me to go to Rome. Only now I have a conscience. Now it's difficult when you see these traditions. What is the mother's right? The questioner continued. Ma haqqul walida? Hayhat, hayhat, the Holy Prophet said. Alas, far be it for this to be answered. The Arabs say hayhat? No. There's no answer here. You see the difference between the man and woman here, the mother and father. hayhat. لو أنه بعدد رمل عالج وقطر المطر أيام الدنيا قام بين يديها. If you were to serve your parents, serve her, قام يديها, if you were to serve your mother to the extent of the number of countless sand that exists, and the raindrops that have dropped since the creation of earth, if you were to count all that and serve her on a par with the number of those sands and raindrops, ما عدل ذلك من يوم حملته في بطنها. It won't equal the efforts that she did for you only one day of her gestation. See, this is difficult to understand, especially if you're not a woman. One day, this is Islam's stance. So, here, even for spiritual wayfaring purposes, if you're with your mother here, good for you, make the most of it. If you're not, make an effort. And today it's easy, distance, you can phone every day, you can Skype every day, over every day. These things are available now. It's not really an excuse. It's easier to practice this today. Even if she's wrong, even if she's... Sometimes one receives emails and they say, the mother is wicked, she does this, she does that. It doesn't matter. It's none of your business how the mother is. Even if she's the most wicked of women. Even if your father is the most wicked of men, God forbid. That's none of your business. You have a set of duties to them. You just think of yourself and do those duties. Whether they do their duties or not is none of your business. This has to be, one has to be attentive here in this respect. Okay. And finally, how to raise children. But tomorrow I want to speak about a different topic, and maybe for 1 or 2 days, some wisdoms behind temporary marriage, how that has been abused, how people are portraying that. I think it's important. And then we'll go back to the Irfani subjects, inshallah. But one last thing I just want to touch upon is Islam's protocol in raising children. That's also a common question they sometimes ask. And since Islam has gone into detail here, it's good for you to know. I'll give you the general principles, and then with my interpretation, it may or not be on a par with your liking, but it's good for you just to know about it, and then you can make your own decision. So there's things when because the problem is this: they come to you, and the child is, let's say, 18, 20, 25, and they're groaning that our child doesn't like religion or is like that or that, and they want us to wave a magic wand and for everything to be as normal. Well, that's not realistic. If you want a proper child with Allah's help, it even starts before procreation. And there are some elements which are even out of your hands in relation to your children. We'll speak more about this later, but spirituality is conveyed, ethical attributes are conveyed at spiritual genetics. We have this in Islam. We'll speak more about that when we want to speak about infallibility. And what does it mean when someone is born infallible? This concept there, we'll go into more detail. But procreation, there are some factors which have an effect on the child. Fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, ancestors in general, their actions, how they acted. At the time of procreation, the time of that intimate act, there are 1,001 different things one has to abide by. One goes to the goes to the physical doctor to take folic acid and other different medications. Everyone cares there. But you never go to a spiritual doctor to see, at the time of procreation, this act, are there any pieces of advice? We see the traditions, they go in depth. Some of them are incredibly important. And that's why we will speak more about it. I don't want to quickly pass through this, but we'll speak more about this later, inshallah. At birth, there are many things that one has to do And it's good to do, like giving the horse, reading the adhan, shaving the hair after 1 week, giving aghira, there's a certain way to give aghira, and so on and so forth. These things all have even some of them have a spiritual effect on the child, all these things. However, that which I want to speak about here is the general protocol which they give in Islam. And I'll read the traditions here. That from 0 to 7, let them just play. Let them be free. No discipline. If you want to teach them, it's okay. But you shouldn't teach them through discipline. That energy has to be released in the first 7 years. They don't understand the language of discipline. And if you force them, it's going to have negative consequences. If they don't release that energy in the first 7 years, that accumulated energy in the next 7 years or the next 7 years is going to manifest itself negatively. One American psychologist, I remember this in my days of medicine, in his book he said, in every divorce case, you just give me the first 5 years of the child, I'll tell you why he divorced. These are subtle points. Even the West are getting there. Let them be. Let them be free. Run around, let them do whatever they want. If you bring them to the center and they're causing problems, then don't bring them to the center. There's no need to bring them here, but you can't discipline them because they don't understand what it means to be disciplined. They don't understand the language of discipline. From 7 to 14, there is the time to discipline. And by that I mean they have to know who is the boss in the house. This is where I think maybe most parents fail, the second 7 years. They have to know who's the boss. They have to learn to submit. And at that age they're very susceptible to submission. And that's okay. Make the most of it. That doesn't mean you have to go against being compassionate, no. But they have to learn how to submit. They have to be the slave now, the servant now. And one of the wisdoms why Islam wants that, because it's in the second 7 years that they acquire the age of puberty. When they acquire the age of puberty, they're going to encounter 101 now wajib actions that they have to do. If they don't understand the notion of submission through parents from 7 onwards, and they never experienced any submission, they were the sultan and the boss of the house, they would have their ways. Well, when you give them the shia and says, now, here you are, darling, there's a list of wajib duties now you have to do from tomorrow. Of course they won't listen. That submission has to be firmly incorporated with them. With the girl, it's at 9 years. There's only 2 years there, because she matures much quicker. That doesn't mean, and in the tradition we have it, the first thing, once they can start speaking, the first thing you teach them is La ilaha illallah. We have traditions like that. Where in the first 7 years it gives different phrases for you to teach them. However, it shouldn't be done with discipline in the first 7 years. That's the point. In the second 7 years, discipline is the first course of action. Or be done with compassion, that's okay. But this is important. And in the third 7 years, no, it's 2 friends now. No one has the upper say. If someone wants to have the upper say, it's going to act negatively for the other one, especially for the child. Because now they have this kind of independence now. They have a kind of dignity for themselves. If you keep on having the upper say and speaking down upon them, it will waste that dignity. It's going to cause bad effects in their married life in future and so on and so forth. That dignity there isn't there in the second 7 years. Now these years, I don't mean to be precise. There's a smooth transition from one realm to the other realm. But these are important. These have to be understood. The child, if you neglect them, especially in the first 14 years, especially the second 7 years, you're going to have a very difficult time. If you want them to be abiding, it's all in the first 14 years. It's going to be very difficult. It has to be sometimes surgical if you want to amend their ways at 16, 18, 20, 22. For example, some instances where the girl, for example, at 18 now decides she doesn't want to wear the hijab. What do you want to do? What can you do? She's 18 now. The compassion has to be there. Two friends. You can't suddenly disown her or may make things even worse. So these are important principles here. And I did list one or two traditions, but we're a bit on time. We don't really have that. But that was the general principle to abide by, those 3 7-year periods. Wasallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi.